This long-haired student, even with a young girl by his side, has a certain type of fetish, and it is for 40-year-old teachers, but with a teacher like that who wouldn't. Even though his duel is about to begin, he completely ignores his opponent, just to ask the teacher out to dinner, and I'll already give you a spoiler that this dinner happened.
Yeah, boy.
The condition to accept the dinner is that he wins the duel. He not only gives his opponent a severe beating, but also cuts his vocal cords and breaks several of his bones. But why does this boy like older women, and is so ruthless with his classmates? In the beginning he was just trash, who was humiliated hundreds of times. Not even Frey Blake's father accepted him being so weak, and told him to disappear from his life. Unable to handle so much pressure, he decided to go back to the lobby. That was when Lucas Trauman took over his body. Lucas was the most powerful archmage of his era, a ninth circle archmage capable of exterminating an entire army with just one spell. For you to have an idea, only 10 mages managed to reach the 8th circle in their lives. The guy was 9th circle. In the end, a demigod appeared and said he was arrogant. He challenged the gods themselves just for having reached the peak of humanity, then locked him away with a powerful spell. He stayed trapped in that place for 4,000 years. He was already almost losing his sanity. When Freya Blake appeared in his consciousness, the boy regrets it and only wanted to be stronger. That was when Lucas took over his body. He swore to give everything Freya wanted, and also swore that he will take revenge on the demigod. He spent the night training hard. On the first day of training, he already managed to reach the 5th rank. Of course, he had to expel many impurities for that, and for reference, the school principal is the 6th circle. Now in the school courtyard, the bullies are greeting each other. Their leader says he was eager to beat Frey again. They even laugh about having beaten him really hard last time. The fat one says that yesterday he saw Frey leaving the infirmary with several sleeping pills. Then they make a bet on whether he decided to end his own life or not, since the leader thinks he wouldn't have the balls to do it. Meanwhile, Lucas had expelled all the impurity from Frey's body. This boy must have really suffered a lot, but obviously not as much as Lucas himself. Shouldn't he look for a blood donation? Now in the Westrot Academy cafeteria, everyone is impressed. Frey is devouring tons of food as if it were nothing. They assume he must have been a week without eating, but the truth is that he has been 4 years without feeling any warmth in his stomach. Well, now Lucas has to attend school full of brats, even though he is 4,000 years old. He needs to understand how everything works, so that only then he can take revenge on the demigod. Now let's go to the classroom. The delinquents are already inside. Everyone stares at him, including the leader, who at the same moment says he won the bet because he is alive. Suddenly the leader puts his foot right in front of Frey's path and says he finally arrived, calling him a classmate. Obviously they are not classmates, and the humiliation is about to begin. Suddenly the big fat guy grabs Frey and asks for 10 meal tickets that he lost in the bet. Frey only thinks who this idiot is for hitting his head like that. Obviously this guy is not a friend of the previous owner of the body. Suddenly he starts trembling all over. Why would he be trembling like that? When the fat guy's blow was about to hit, Frey appears behind the fat boy like Goku teleporting. Everyone in the classroom is shocked by such speed, even the academy's muse. The fat one doesn't understand, and Lucas realizes that the body trembles like that because these guys were the ones who made him give up on living. His anger flared. The boy got back up and reached for Frey's head, trying to slap him, but Frey released a burst of energy, and without even taking his hands from his pockets, sent him flying again. He crashed through several wooden chairs. Now the bully was red-faced, bruised, exhausted, and totally confused. Frey had beaten him without using a single spell chant. Whispers spread fast. People said Frey seemed like a completely different person. Realizing he'd made a scene in front of a bunch of kids, Frey felt a little embarrassed. The whole class had frozen. He tried to quietly slip back out of attention. David was too scared to speak. He could only watch. No one could believe weak little Frey had done all this. The red-haired girl kept watching him closely. Then a voice asked what was going on. It was Professor Dio, just arriving. Jack had passed out cold. Professor Dio walked over to check him, and found traces of mana still left in his body. That discovery shocked him. He couldn't believe someone this gifted was in the class. Looking around, he wondered which student had done it. Since Dio took Jack away and confirmed he was only unconscious, Professor Kevin took over the lesson. The students exchanged uneasy looks as class was about to start. Professor Kevin quickly noticed all the girls in the room. Seeing they were the majority, he decided this was the best class already. Then his eyes settled on Isabel, quietly reading. A moment later, he noticed someone else. Frey was there too, also reading a book. One girl whispered that she hated this professor because he turned into a gross pig whenever he looked at women. He walked up to Frey, who watched him carefully. It was odd seeing the boy in class at all, since he barely ever came. Frey wasn't sure how to answer. Kevin first assumed he was a serious student, then remembered he was always absent. With a smile, Frey apologized and said he'd been very busy. The girls whispered that it was pathetic, especially since he only got bullied whenever he did show up. Curious, the professor asked what could be more important than his class. Frey dodged the question and said he was living the peak of his youth. The girls tried not to laugh. Kevin thought it was nonsense, though he wasn't the type to act like his subject was all that mattered. Instead, he asked if Frey had been studying properly. He decided to test him. If Frey couldn't answer, he'd pay for acting bold in class. The quiz started. First question. Name the 3 items used by the magic warrior King Cassidon. Frey's eyes narrowed. Instead of replying, he asked the professor to repeat it. He hadn't caught the name clearly, but it sounded very familiar. 4,000 years ago, there had been a hero, strong, fearless, with mysterious powers that amazed everyone. He trained in martial arts with unmatched focus. His energy could tear down whole forests, causing quakes and destruction wherever he went. He could even reshape the land itself, and never seemed to get tired. One day, his friend joked that if he didn't stop, there'd be no mountains left. That friend, carrying a bag over his shoulder, was Lucas Trauman. It had been some time since he'd last seen Kassadin. The day was calm, and Lucas watched his friend still training. Kassadin didn't stop, even with a guest there. He just said he'd made tea, and Lucas could pour himself some. As they drank, Lucas asked if he'd ever thought about getting married. Kassadin paused for a moment. Then he teased Lucas, saying he'd never understand a woman's heart. To love a woman, he said, could shake a man to his core. Anyone with a weak mind would fall to temptation. Kassadin believed a warrior had to stay firm as stone around women. That wasn't exactly how mages saw things. Lucas studied his friend, and Kassadin quietly looked back. After a while, Lucas joked he'd date a rock if it was pretty enough. The memory hit Frey so hard he started crying. He realized his friend, the magic warrior King Kassadin, had become famous after all these years. Professor Kevin had no idea why the student reacted like that. The rest of the class just argued over whether the question was too hard. Isabel could tell the professor only asked it to show off and embarrass Frey. Then a voice politely asked to interrupt. Isabel said the question had nothing to do with magical history. The class was stunned by how bold she was. Even Frey noticed she spoke like a soldier, despite how delicate she looked. The professor focused on her at once. His expression tightened. She argued that Kassadin was a warrior who only used mana to support training, so he shouldn't be treated as a mage. Then she waited nervously for his answer. Kevin walked up the steps toward her and stopped beside her desk. He asked if student Isabel was insulting everyone who chose the path of a magic warrior. Shaken, she said that wasn't what she meant. The whole class watched in silence. Frey took it as an insult too, remembering Kassadin hated being called a mage. The professor let out a strained laugh and said, this might turn into an interesting discussion. He put a hand on her shoulder and told both of them to come to his office. But Isabel quickly pushed his hand away. That caught him completely off guard. He hadn't expected a student to defy him so openly. Isabel could see no easy way out. As he pressed her to answer in Frey's place, someone spoke first. The words Tiger King's glove and Giant's belt made the professor freeze. He slowly turned toward the speaker. It was Frey, calmly saying Kassadin used only those 3 items. He almost started talking about how he and Kassadin used to be friends, then stopped and asked if he'd said something strange. The professor admitted through gritted teeth that the answer was correct. Frey proudly said there was no way he'd miss a question like that. To everyone else, he seemed especially odd today. Kevin then turned back to Isabel and said her behavior was disrespectful. He grabbed her wrist and ordered her to come with him to his office. She froze, not knowing what to do. Frey watched the whole thing, then stepped in with something Kassadin used to say. He repeated that loving a woman could shake a man to his core. Kassadin also said a warrior should stay firm as stone before women, or a weak-minded man would give in to temptation and become nothing more than an animal. The professor hated being interrupted and didn't get the point, so he snapped that maybe Kassadin was wrong. Frey glanced down and noticed the professor was still standing solidly on both feet. Then Kevin caught the insult, and rage flooded his face. He shouted Frey's name and fumed at the boy's nerve. That was when Isabel realized Frey had defended her. Now Professor Kevin focused fully on the student who had grown bold after one right answer. He warned that Frey would regret it if he failed the rest of the quiz. Frey calmly waited for the next question. Meanwhile, the professor was sweating hard. The students could only stare in shock. Frey answered every question with ease. Even on the Age of Light, his knowledge was unbelievable. When the bell rang, Frey was just glad it was finally lunch. He called out to Professor Kevin, and after saying he'd had fun, asked if there were more questions because he was starving. Kevin couldn't understand how this brat knew so much about events from 4,000 years ago. Frey's face gave nothing away. The professor only grew more frustrated, sweat running down his forehead. In the end, he dismissed class and kept thinking about what had happened. Isabel was just as stunned. Outside the academy, Frey walked along happily, even humming to himself. Then Isabel asked if he was going to lunch. She had come up behind him, but he didn't answer. She still looked at him with pity. Frey turned away and ignored her, but she kept following anyway. So they ended up walking one behind the other. Frey soon noticed. He turned and asked why she was trailing him. He also found her formal way of speaking annoying, though that came from her family. Soon the students headed into the cafeteria. Lunch was being served. Isabel was shocked by how much Frey could eat. He casually said he hadn't eaten in 4,000 years. Still, he didn't explain much more. Isabel apologized for following him and said there wasn't anywhere else she wanted to sit. Then she asked how he knew so much about the Age of Light. History said that era got its name from the dazzling powers of the 4 great masters. While chewing, Frey became interested. He realized that after 4,000 years, magic hadn't advanced at all. It had gotten worse. He wondered if the demigod had something to do with it. Across from him, the girl ate in silence as he explained that the 4 great masters were Kassadin, the magic warrior, Schweizer Wilsman the sage, Iris Peacefounder the dark witch, and Lucas Trauman. She lit up at Lucas's name and called him an amazing man. Then she joked that if he were still alive, she'd ask her mother to marry him. Frey burst out laughing at her comment. He couldn't believe someone that young was already talking about marriage. Amused and a little flattered, he politely rejected the offer. Meanwhile, other students were watching them talk. Rumors had already spread that Isabel followed him earlier. She was known as the Academy's second-best student, and even crazy David had a crush on her. Right then, David showed up after hearing his name. The others quickly backed away from him, while Frey and Isabel kept talking. David couldn't believe what he was seeing. As she cut a sausage, Isabel asked about Professor Kevin's last question. Frey kept eating while explaining that Schweizer's training methods were assimilation, development, and conflict. She said she'd only ever learned the first two. She set a hand on the table and asked him to teach her about conflict. Taking another bite of bread, Frey asked what level she was. Isabel had reached the 3rd degree of magic. He was impressed someone her age had made it that far. She pointed out that he talked like an old man. Licking his plate clean, he said he'd lived a very long time. To her, though, they were still the same age. In a way, she was both right and wrong. After finishing the mountain of food, Frey said he was finally full. He got up with the dishes, still without saying if he'd teach her conflict. He told her he didn't know it in any formal way, only from experience, so she should read books instead. That meant he couldn't teach it properly. Hearing that he had actual experience shocked her even more. She couldn't understand how a boy his age knew so much about magic. As he walked off with the plates, she kept wondering who he really was. Later, the students had magic duel class. To keep things fair, everyone was limited to 1st-degree spells. David was thrilled about it, and even more annoyed seeing Frey get closer to Isabel. He couldn't understand why she talked to Frey so much. The teacher warned them this would be treated like a real fight, so they needed to take it seriously. Frey paid close attention to the teacher. Her name was Jane. He was totally taken by her beauty. Isabel protested, saying it was wrong to act like that around a 40-year-old teacher. But he kept going on about how beautiful she was, even saying she had the perfect woman's body. Isabel was stunned that even his taste in women seemed old-fashioned. The first duel was David versus Frey. The two faced each other, ready to fight. Frey stepped forward slowly. Grinning, David said he could hardly wait and held out his hand. Frey ignored him and turned away. Something about him felt different. He didn't seem like the same boy David used to bully. Then the students gasped as Frey grabbed Professor Jane by the waist and praised her looks. When she froze in shock, he told her not to worry. He might look young, but inside he was older than her. Then he asked her out to dinner that night. Jane struggled to get free and told him to return to his place. Frey made a bet. If he won, she had to have dinner with him. No one thought he could pull it off since he was only 1st degree and David was 3rd degree. Sure he would lose, Jane accepted the bet. Now they had a deal. His words left her flustered. Her cheeks turned pink, and she quickly tried to calm herself down. Her heart shouldn't be racing because of a boy. Now face to face, David asked if Frey had gone crazy. He kept trying to get under his skin, thinking this was all just a trick to make the teacher cancel the match. Anger and hate were clear in his eyes. He kept mocking Frey, who didn't react. David said he'd rip out his vocal cords, then break every bone in his body. This would be Frey's last day walking normally, but Frey showed no fear at all. As far as he remembered, 1st-degree spells couldn't do that much damage. Still, David acted like he could do anything. At Professor Jane's signal, the fight began. Both boys held their ground. David opened with Stone Fury. Large rocks rose from the ground, and a huge stone arrow formed in the air. The students were shocked that he could use Stone Fury. Isabel was stunned too. Jane had said only 1st-degree spells were allowed, but David hadn't actually broken the rules. The red-haired girl demanded to know how a spell like that was allowed. David said it was a skill only a direct family heir could use, then activated vision magic. Even though it was powerful, a 1st-degree mage could still use it. His family treated vision magic as a symbol of power, but he used it just to bully people. Pointing the stone arrows at Frey, he decided his opponent was scared. Frey brushed it off and said those spells were nothing. Then he cast magic missile with one hand. The crowd went silent in shock, including Isabel. The color of the spell shone brilliantly. David laughed. Sure, magic missile couldn't beat Stone Fury. He sent the stone arrow at Frey, and in a single clash, Frey destroyed every stone and blasted David away at terrifying speed. The force threw him through the air. He hit the ground and rolled. Badly hurt, he started foaming at the mouth. The students were left speechless. Even Professor Jane was drawn in by Frey's power. He seemed to have grown a lot. Meanwhile, David screamed in pain, unable to speak because his throat was injured. The sight was horrifying. Nearby, one student still held a stone in his hand. They had only come to watch a C-class practice match. Frey said David was shaming his family by using vision magic so shamelessly in a duel. David tried to talk, but only drool ran from his mouth. Remembering David's threat to tear out his vocal cords, Frey gave a faint smile. The glowing sphere appeared again to do its job. David had promised to crush his bones one by one, and Frey was ready to return the favor. Knowing he'd lost, David wanted to beg for mercy, but no words came out because of the damage. With a light touch, Frey fired the sphere again. It struck David's leg, and he screamed in agony, realizing how doomed he was. The bones in his right leg were shattered completely. Even then, Frey kept walking toward him, saying this was David's own plan. Isabel covered her mouth, seeing the violence go too far. Professor Jane turned and ordered the duel stopped at once, naming Frey the winner, but David had never surrendered. Frey reminded her that she'd said to treat this like a real battle, and that there were no timeouts on a battlefield. Isabel couldn't understand the teacher's logic. Powerless, she lowered her head. Frey's eyes changed color, showing his anger. David had enjoyed hurting others, but now it was his turn. Frey said mages like him were why the world had become such a mess. For everyone's sake, he should never use magic again. Step by step, Frey came closer. Then he said he was joking. He wouldn't break every bone. Out of pity, he'd end it there. David cried even harder, relieved for a moment, but Frey turned back and said, it still wasn't over. David had one leg left, so he'd use magic missile on that one too. Watching the sphere form again, David's eyes filled with despair. The power in Frey's hand kept growing. David tried to scream, but no sound came out. From afar, others quietly watched Frey's power. One blonde student paid close attention before turning away and leaving. Elsewhere, 2 more people studied the arena. The story spread through the academy fast. People said Frey crushed David in a duel and ruined his vocal cords and legs. Most secretly thought David was an idiot, and the academy was better off without him. Still, they couldn't believe the Blake family's trash had actually won. Some even guessed he'd made a deal with the devil. As Frey walked through the halls, a man stopped him. Frey didn't know him, so he asked his name. The boy introduced himself as Yeoman Milost, a 4th-year student. Once he learned he was an upperclassman, Frey introduced himself too. They traded sharp looks. Then Yeoman directly offered him a place in the Trauman Rings. Hearing that name stirred something in Frey. By now he already knew about the group. It was a student organization that represented Westroad Academy, and not just anyone could join. They chose members carefully. The rune ring on Yeoman's hand proved he belonged to the Trauman Rings. Frey, meanwhile, was mostly wondering if using his name without permission counted as invading his privacy. He listened while the student kept talking. Before Yeoman could even say he was the group's leader, Frey turned away. He had no interest in joining them. A voice then said that boy wouldn't be easy to convince. It was Perun Jun standing in the hallway. Yeoman greeted his imposing companion. Hearing the name, Frey paid attention. The newcomer stepped forward and introduced himself as the group's leader. He apologized for Yeoman's behavior and said his friend had still told the truth about the Trauman Rings. Frey just stared at him in silence. He started paying real attention to the boy in front of him. For someone that young, he looked like a strong leader. Still, Frey had no interest in joining. He walked off saying he wouldn't charge them for using his name. Duman got furious at how cocky he was, but Piran told him to let it go. Scratching his head, his friend apologized for the outburst. Meanwhile, the blue-eyed boy watched him go. That night, guests started arriving. Dinner was already prepared. The professor had promised to eat with Frey, though. Isabel being there felt odd. While they ate, Isabel casually said to ignore her and pretend she wasn't there. Annoyed, Frey told her to leave. She only shrugged and brought up the conflict method, making the professor listen closely. Since Frey hadn't taught her yet, Isabel figured the best plan was to stay near him. Interested, Professor Jane asked if she meant Schweizer's training method. Isabel was surprised the professor knew about it too. Jane took a sip of her drink and said she'd only heard rumors from other warriors. She had searched the records many times and found nothing. Once she realized Frey knew something, she wanted to hear more. Frey quietly drank from his cup. Then a man came to the table and a sudden touch startled the professor. Frey stood behind her, hugged her, and said he could teach her something even more interesting. He wanted to continue the talk in his room. The professor felt drawn to him, though she hesitated because he was only 20. It was like her mind and body weren't working together. Right before they kissed, Isabel slammed the table and told Frey to stop acting shameless with the professor. The moon hung high overhead. By the balcony, Frey thought about his new life. If the demigod truly ruled the world, that made him a serious threat. Even after 4,000 years, people still remembered Cassadine, Schweizer, Iris, and him. That meant his legacy was still alive and people were still fighting for it. Isabel quietly walked over. He was so lost in thought he didn't notice. She just stared at him with wide eyes. A moment later, Frey met her gaze and asked her something. He wanted to know who ran the academy. More than that, he wanted the strongest person among the students, professors, and staff. Before answering, she complained that he never answered her questions. He promised he would if she told him who the boss was. Excited, she celebrated with little hand motions. She said the strongest student was Perun Jun, and among the professors it was Professor Dio Pulsman and Professor Adelia. But overall, the strongest was probably her aunt. Her aunt was the headmistress of Westerad Academy, Madame Cyrus Trisnine. Professor Jane then joined them. She explained that Cyrus was a famous 6th-degree mage with a cold personality. Frey could feel how overwhelming that rank was. In theory, mages could reach the 9th degree, but no one had done it for over 3,000 years. Some even doubted it was possible, saying the true limit was 8th degree. Fewer than 10 mages had ever reached that, so 9th degree was basically a legend. Frey looked around and asked if the headmistress had also cast the spell protecting the academy. Professor Jane wasn't sure, but said it was possible. Frey understood he couldn't take on a 6th-degree mage yet. Then he remembered the offer from the Trauman Rings. Feeling that something was off, he decided he needed to meet Cyrus Trisnine. He turned to his new friend and called her over. His expression softened as he thought about the favor he was about to ask, because dragging an innocent child into this might be a bad idea. His goal was to reach at least the 7th degree. The professor told him that would take 10 years, even if he was fast. Frey replied that he'd get there before the vacation ended. Jane laughed and said big dreams were nice to have, but he meant every word. When he noticed the professor was alone, he walked up and tried flirting again. Isabel, annoyed, reminded him she was still there. She warned that if a teacher got caught with a student, her aunt would have words with them. That instantly killed his plans. It was exactly why he disliked little kids. So Professor Jane agreed and left, which only irritated Isabel more. The lamps lit the night. Frey knew he didn't need to rush. He just had to avoid mistakes. Looking up at the moon, he chose the fastest path. 2 weeks later, someone came in limping. David was back at school, looking for Frey. He still refused to accept losing, saying there was no way trash like Frey could beat him. Everyone in the hall heard him yelling. Meanwhile, Frey calmly read his book. Red-faced with rage, David swore he'd make him regret being born. He said he'd turn Frey's life into hell, but before he finished, Frey fired a magic missile and knocked him down. David's crutches flew as he hit the floor. The other students watched in fear. Now his nose was broken too. Later in class, Professor Kevin said David had gone home to fix it. Bored, Frey wandered the halls. He thought students at prestigious Westerrat Academy should at least act with some class. To learn how to use mana straight from his body, he needed real combat. Then someone called out, "Hey, gray-haired guy." A boy behind him said they'd heard Frey was good with magic. In a damaged room, the boy introduced himself as Alex Dreamed, an upperclassman who clearly expected Frey to be impressed. Without any fear, he bragged that he could crush the skinny kid in front of him without breaking a sweat. Angry, he demanded to know what Frey had done to David, whom he called his little brother. Frey didn't look concerned at all. He wondered if these idiots were bothering him on purpose. Demanding respect, the senior raised his hand. To Frey, they were just spoiled brats. Dreamed kept asking why Frey had fought his friend. As he bragged about placing 17th in the last Gladeheed Magic tournament, Frey yawned. At last, the senior tried to scare him by saying this would be his funeral day. To Frey, it was just a loudmouth threatening a freshman to look cool in front of his friends. Those boys were only there to watch. There was no need to gang up on someone they thought was weak, especially when Frey was already making a magic missile. It struck 3 students at once, while Alex was blasted far back. Frey's power could drop several people in one shot. That only made them angrier. Alex lay on the floor without moving. The others complained it wasn't fair to attack while someone was talking. But to Frey, messing with spoiled brats was funny. Their attacks got even fiercer because of his attitude. Thulboric's first son of the Gillard family wanted to crush him. Pre's second son of the Pinalark family joined in too. Even so, Frey wasn't intimidated. He raised his hands and fired a second magic missile. As the students rushed him, he kept building more energy and dropping them one after another. Even a simple motion made a strong missile. In the end, he sat on a pile of worn-out bodies, thinking the whole thing had been a waste of time. With a scoff, he decided none of them were worth the effort. Clouds drifted over the academy. Frey had been studying so much to improve his techniques that he fell asleep from exhaustion. Then someone asked what he'd been doing lately. He turned and saw Isabel. Students had started calling him the Deadly Missile because he kept dropping people with magic missile. The nickname embarrassed him badly, but he still hadn't had a chance to use stronger spells. Isabel was startled by the strange feeling she had for him. Seeing him resting on the desk, she couldn't stop staring. Without lifting his face from the table, he asked what she wanted. She said she had followed his advice. She already knew true blood could improve magic circles, but mixing it with magical essence in a 7-to-3 ratio was new to her. Using Troxo blood would make it even better. Even so, she thanked him for the amazing discovery. After a short pause, she wondered what he would teach her next. Frey looked so tired and bored that he just stared at her. She held his gaze, clearly curious about what he could do. He still hadn't realized he had become Isabel's personal tutor. Since she was gifted, he knew proper teaching could bring her to the 7th degree. He thought it over for a while. Then he called to her and said he'd teach her conflict next. She lit up at once, unable to believe it was finally happening. He told her he would leave the academy during break to train and she could come watch. He warned the trip would be hard, maybe even deadly, but she accepted before he could finish. She truly wanted to learn conflict. No matter what, she was going with him to train. When it was time to leave, she showed up with a huge backpack. Frey couldn't believe how much useless stuff she had packed. Still, he figured women carried all kinds of things he didn't understand. A little nervous, she asked where they were going. Even Frey wasn't fully sure yet. He was thinking about the Hispania Mountains. That place was known as a monster paradise, and extremely dangerous. With a map, they searched for the fastest route and estimated the travel time. By ship, it would take about half a day, but the road to the mountains was tricky and full of monsters. Still, Isabel got ready without showing any fear. She had never expected the trip to be easy. Frey frowned at her attitude. As they walked, they talked about teleportation stones for long-distance travel. Those things didn't exist 4,000 years ago. Magic hadn't improved much, but technology had. Even so, traveling huge distances with a stone sounded amazing. The problem was the price. The trip from Cow Symphony to Hispaniola was so far it would cost around 10 gold. Frey checked his bag for money, but only found 1 gold. Still, he had another plan. Isabel was a noble too, like Frey Blake, so he politely asked how much money she had. She brought none. According to her, money makes people lazy, so she left it behind for this training trip. She even said earning travel money was part of the training. Frey was stunned by how shameless she sounded while carrying that giant backpack. Isabel snapped that the two things had nothing to do with each other. Women needed a lot of stuff. They kept going, thinking they'd figure something out once they reached the port. Neither of them had ever worked before. Near the docks, they found the place crowded with sailors and workers. They looked up in shock at the huge wooden ship. It was free for academy students, which explained the crowd of students nearby. The food was also supposed to be excellent. Free was already drooling over the thought of it, but then learned the ship was full, and the next one wouldn't leave for 4 days. He dropped to the ground, sure they'd never make it on time. Their only choice was the Cortez, an older, plainer ship. Still, they couldn't really complain. That was just how life went. Even with a stop at Juttenbowl, it would reach Cow Symphony in under 5 days, and academy students still rode free. Inside, the crew was talking among themselves. A scar-faced man said everything was ready. The captain ordered them to sail that night for a perfect raid. Another man with an eye patch laughed. Someone asked why he'd removed his eye, and he said it was the mark of a pirate. Studying a map, they discussed the bloodthirsty pirates. Pointing to a remote area, one of them said their target was the ship stopping at Juttenbowl. They'd ambush it after it passed the Oskill Islands. All that was left was the ship's name. It was the Cortez, packed with rich kids. Frey and Isabel stood at the front of the ship. The captain introduced himself and welcomed everyone aboard. Isabel politely started talking with him. Without this ship, they'd have waited 4 more days, and despite being decent, it had few passengers. The captain explained why the route passed the Oskill Islands, where pirates often appeared. Isabel got nervous, but he quickly reassured her. Only 2 warships escorted them, but each had a 4th-degree mage, and both were battle mages from the Magic Tower. So even if pirates came, they shouldn't be a threat. The 2 mages kept up their protective spells. That helped Isabel relax. If the pirates had any sense, they wouldn't attack. Then Frey noticed something unsettling. The crew was suddenly shaken by the sight of pirates. A large, heavily armed ship was heading straight for them. Even Captain Mac was stunned. Isabel stared in panic at what was happening, while Frey stayed calm. The warships had already been sunk. That alone proved these weren't normal pirates. They had huge cannons and serious resolve. A few minutes earlier, the pirates had found their target and seen the Cortez coming. The 2 escort ships worried them, but they had a secret weapon, a special guest for the raid. Speaking in a strange language, he showed his power. It was Lord Dullard, a lich helping them attack. His magic terrified even the pirates. He gave off pure darkness and destruction, but the captain trusted him. It was an undead monster, and with a lich on his side, the captain thought he'd make pirate history. The undead began preparing his spell. Dark power mixed with shadow magic. His first attack was Ice Spear. He fired at the warships, piercing the hulls to strike the mages in charge. Seeing the attack, the 2 mages tried to defend themselves. It was too late, the spears were too strong. They tried everything, but the ice kept tearing through the ships and destroyed them completely. The pirate captain laughed, already dreaming of the riches they'd take that night. His crew drew their swords for battle. As they approached, he tried praising Dullard's spell work. Then the undead sensed something odd. When he turned, even the captain flinched. Dullard said he had cast 3 ice spears. He couldn't understand why the last ship was still afloat. The captain then remembered he'd asked him not to destroy that one, since the passengers were meant to be hostages. That only annoyed the lich, who snapped and called him a boneheaded brat. He said he'd attack just hard enough to stop escape and resistance, not to sink the ship. The pirates still looked confused. Dullard told him something about that ship felt strange. Meanwhile, chaos broke out on the Cortez, as students ran across the deck. Off to the side, a mysterious figure sat still. Under a hood, he looked tired and breathed heavily. Frey and Isabel stayed where they were, unsure what to do. Isabel was terrified after seeing the warships wiped out, but Freya's face didn't change. He put a hand on her head and told her to calm down. For now, they were only dealing with pirates. He had bigger concerns. He'd seen 3 ice spears, but the one aimed at their ship vanished midair. He knew he hadn't cast any defense spell, so he started thinking it through. He had felt the mana, yet couldn't stop it. Then he sensed a presence that reminded him of the demigod's pain, and anger rose in him, because he'd been unable to defend himself. He forced himself to focus. It wasn't a demigod. The mana felt undead, but they still didn't know who had protected the ship. With a hand near his lips, he kept thinking. Whoever it was, they deserved thanks. Meanwhile, the pirate ship kept closing in. The students ran around in panic. The ships drew side by side, and ladders were thrown across as bridges. Armed pirates rushed aboard. The crew cried for help, not knowing how to fight back. People ran everywhere in total chaos. Bodies started dropping as someone rose to act. The real fight was starting. The Cortez was smaller than the Nifla, but it still carried many passengers, about 40 children from wealthy families. Thinking of ransom money, the pirate captain grinned. He greeted them and introduced his crew as the bloodthirsty pirates. The captain of the Cortez drew his sword to face him, but the pirate only saw a treasure chest full of rich heirs. His crew roared with laughter. The insult enraged everyone. Then the pirate noticed someone standing before him, a student who looked helpless. The boy declared the ship was full of model students who would become great mages. In short, this was the wrong ship to attack. The pirate captain saw what he was trying to do, as the boy started using magic to defend himself. Before he could finish, something flew at him and slammed him into the wood. The pirate captain had thrown a knife. The boy instantly panicked. With the blade lodged by his neck, he shook in fear. Frey and Isabel stood frozen in the chaos. Frey could tell the knife had been aimed at the boy's neck, but its course had changed. Feeling the hooded man's presence, he wondered if that was the same person who had protected the ship. A voice then said the young man couldn't stand against the pirate. The figure warned him not to take risks, stay quiet and obey. The pirate captain acted like it had all been a mistake, then decided to stop fooling around. Spotting an easy target, he chose to make an example of him. The boy backed away, trying to protect himself. He was so scared he wet himself. The captain mocked him for it, calling him a baby. One pirate said he'd handle it. He threw the boy over his shoulder and joked about giving him a bath. The hooded figure told him to stop, but the pirate tossed the boy into the sea. The student struggled to swim and begged for help. He drifted farther from the ship until he vanished from sight. Even though Orko was second degree, he was killed without mercy. The pirates didn't care at all. Enraged, the other students finally attacked with magic. The captain just complained that the kids were too loud. The students launched spell after spell, but something much stronger crushed them. The undead's power was shielding the pirates. It spread everywhere, blocking every attack. The students had no idea how to fight that evil force. The pirate captain only laughed, while the undead handled the real work. Using dark magic, he overwhelmed the students. A shadowy force tried to pull them all in. One boy stared in disbelief. He had only read about this in books, a terrifying, powerful lich. Isabel was horrified by the monster, but Frey stayed deep in thought. The pirates had made a deal with an immortal being, but immortals don't bargain with mortals unless they're using them. The pirates, of course, cared only about money. Their greed mattered more than anything. Scared, Isabel grabbed Frey, and he told her to let go because she was making him even hotter. Then he saw her face and froze. She was crying. Now it was clear these weren't normal pirates. The lich was at least 5th degree, which was why the mages on the ship couldn't stop him. The pirate captain turned toward the mysterious figure. Wanting answers, the lich ordered whoever blocked his attack to step forward. He knew that person was somewhere on the ship. When no one answered, he made a threat. Ice arrows formed in his hand, and he warned that if the person stayed hidden, everyone would die. The crew was terrified. Laughing like a madman, he made the arrows even bigger and deadlier. The captain tried to stop Lord Dullard, reminding him they still needed hostages, but the undead shot him a terrifying glare. Even the captain couldn't meet his eyes. Then someone stepped forward quietly. The hooded man still kept his face hidden, but the lich already suspected he was the one who interfered. Without hesitation, the young man admitted it was him. Interested, the lich asked for his name. Then the boy pulled back his hood, and everyone was stunned. Even Isabel looked shocked. Frey, though, seemed oddly detached from it all. The boy introduced himself as Perun Jun. Isabel recognized him as a classmate from the academy. Everyone knew Perun. He led the academy's biggest club and was the true son of one of the Empire's 3 most powerful families. He also had top grades and often fought Isabel for first place. But this wasn't the time for that. She admitted that while their grades were close, his degree was probably much higher than hers. The girls were amazed to see Perun on the ship. Some even cheered, thinking they might survive. Isabel hoped Perun could handle this, but Frey told her not to expect too much. Blood was dripping from Perun's mouth. He was likely barely standing. The lich was at least 5th degree, and though Perun was gifted, it looked like he had only just reached that level. Surviving a spell stronger than his own was already a miracle. Desperate, Isabel asked if Frey was above the undead's level, but he said no. Even then, he asked her to step back because he still felt overheated, worn out. Perun regretted picking that ship. He had chosen the one with fewer students so he wouldn't stand out, and it turned out to be a huge mistake. He had stopped the spell, but the effort left his body feeling like it might break apart. Facing the creature, he had no idea how to beat it. The undead said this was his lucky day. He hadn't expected to find such fine material. The two locked eyes in silence. Thinking death was near, Perun shut his eyes. Then someone asked the pirate captain what he really wanted. With a faint smile, he said it was nothing serious. Seeing so many valuable children crossing the dangerous Ossel Islands, they simply couldn't ignore it. So as friends to all, they would escort them safely to Cow Symphony. One pirate added that the captain was a busy man, but he finished by saying they'd only do it after getting paid for their protection. So in the end, it was all about money. Perun stood completely still. Then he made another offer. He would be the only hostage. The Jun family could pay twice what the pirates expected to make, but the captain refused, saying with an immortal on his side he could get any amount he wanted. Perun gave a small shrug and admitted he had a point. He wasn't strong enough to beat the lich they hired. Still, he said he'd fight with everything he had and make sure he wouldn't die alone. That answer shocked the captain. Frey found himself genuinely interested in the boy and liked him more for having that kind of spirit at his age. He thought the nation had a bright future ahead. But the undead had no intention of changing his mind. Perun's mana was incredible, yet he still turned pale when he understood what the monster wanted. He tried to dodge the dark attacks, but the undead meant to drain all his mana and turn his body into a servant. Using his power, he caught Perun in his claws. At that point, talks were over, and the plan was to move everyone to the pirate ship. The students ran in panic, but the pirates seized them by force. They grabbed the girls tightly and wouldn't let go. The pirates looked pleased with themselves, until the one-eyed pirate remembered he should help take hostages too. Then he noticed Isabel. He moved toward her, and she shrank behind Frey. The pirate mocked Frey, calling him a twig. Frey glanced around like he didn't know who he meant, until he realized the pirate was talking to him. The man mocked him again, this time as a skinny brat. Frey calmly asked for a little respect. That answer really got under the pirate's skin. Cracking his hands, he decided to beat Frey down. But Frey didn't budge or obey. By then, some students were already tied up. Jack muttered that fame had gone to Frey's head. The pirate was getting fed up. He stormed toward Frey and charged with his sword ready. Everyone watched closely. Even with fear all around him, Frey stayed still. The pirate closed in, ready to land the final hit. Isabel shut her eyes, unable to watch. But the one who got smashed and lost teeth was the pirate. Frey blasted him away with his power. The man flew off like rotten fruit. Frey briefly looked at the result. His kick had sent the enemy straight into the sea, leaving everyone stunned. Because the one standing there was Frey, the Academy's so-called eternal loser. The blonde boy with blue eyes could only stare, trying to figure out what kind of move that was. He replayed it in his mind, a spinning kick filled with mana before the pirate could even strike. He already knew Frey had talent, but not control this perfect. Back in the moment, Frey stopped the redhead from stepping forward, and patted her on the head. He told her to stay sharp. Everyone there was weaker than her except the Lich, so she could protect herself just fine, right? The mage gave him a small smile and touched her head. Then she focused again while Frey faced the pirates. One of the kidnappers asked what had just happened. Then he mocked it, saying his friend only lost because he got distracted by a pretty girl. In the next instant, the gray-haired boy was in front of him. Moving so fast he stirred the air, the pirate couldn't even process that speed. From the back, the Lich watched in silence, studying Frey and clearly surprised. Then Aura burst out with a loud explosion. Still confused, the pirate groaned in pain. Frey had struck him dead and coldly said they should never have taken that deal. He didn't like this arrangement, and he wasn't going to play nice anymore. For a second, Frey noted that he'd never killed before, but it no longer mattered as everyone stared in shock. Men like that were never going to like someone like him anyway. All the pirates rushed the gray-haired boy with loud cries. Frey met them with a cold stare, grabbed the fallen man by the neck and flung him into two others. Then he followed up with an aura attack that tore through everyone ahead of him. The pirates still standing tried to circle around and hit him from behind, but in a blink, Frey spread his aura and crushed them too. The man beside the Lich could only call it impossible. Meanwhile, Frey kept taking the pirates down one after another. The students watched in stunned awe at the huge gap in power. One pirate tried to save himself by grabbing a girl hostage and begging for mercy, but Frey rushed him instantly so fast it looked like he left after images. One kick sent the pirate flying over the girl and smashed him right in the mouth. The others tried to surround Frey, but he jumped up and made them crash into each other instead. Angry, they yelled that they'd drag him to the bottom of the sea, but when they looked up, the gray-haired boy was holding a huge sphere of energy. They panicked and begged him to stop, but he fired it with a cold face and without a word. Their screams were the last thing heard, and then only dust and scorched marks remained. Frey slowly dropped back down. Then he noticed one pirate had survived. The man was holding the mage hostage and called Frey a monster. He warned Frey not to move or he'd hurt her. Frey stared at him for a second and flatly asked what he had just said. The bald pirate blinked in confusion, and before he realized it, the mage was already charging an attack. She looked straight into his eyes and released a huge electric shock that swallowed them both. One blast was enough to drop him. The crew around them fell silent, too stunned to speak. The Lich and the redhead beside him were just as shocked. The mage and Frey looked at each other for a moment until the redhead asked what he thought of her skills. Frey dryly said she acted sweet and harmless for someone that dangerous. Then applause rang out and the clapping from behind made the hero turn. It was the thug beside the Lich, slow clapping and mocking their strength. Even so, he admitted he was actually impressed. Hero and villain locked eyes for a brief moment. Then the villain broke the silence with an offer. He said the boy was clearly no ordinary mage, but handling the whole ship alone would still be hard. The gray-haired boy stayed silent and let him talk. The villain said he only wanted half, just half of the trainees. The hero glanced at the captives. One was crying for his mother, while others sobbed, begging not to be taken. The villain asked if he'd take the deal, save some people and leave alive, calling it a win-win. The hero asked how that was a win-win, when most of the enemy force was already gone. The villain only shrugged and sneered. He said the gray-haired boy could choose who stayed and who got handed over. A blonde woman suddenly ran up, begging to be picked. She tried throwing herself at him, desperate to be saved. If money wasn't enough, she offered other kinds of payment, promising she'd do anything he wanted. Another trainee dropped to his knees and begged too. Soon more joined in, offering money to buy their lives. The gray-haired boy dryly said he had no choice and told Isabel to collect the payments. But Isabel snapped that he couldn't seriously do that. Hearing her protest, he smirked and joked about starting an auction, which only made her madder. The crowd kept crying, begging, and swarming around him, while the others could only watch in silence. Frey finally asked if they were done yet, then he shoved the blonde away, saying she was too clingy and smelled like rotten fish. He called them rats, saying all they'd learned was how to use money to get their way. They lived off their parents' hard-earned rewards and used that to push others around, hardly worthy of being called mages. A mage, he said, is supposed to protect the weak. A real mage saves others before himself, and that only made the girl admire him more. Then he ruined the moment by bringing up payment again, making the redhead lose it. Meanwhile, the villains watched from a distance. The red-haired one glanced at the Lich, wondering why he was so quiet. Was he doubting he could beat that boy? The Lich replied that no human was beyond his power. The redhead froze, shocked that the lich had read his thoughts, then quickly straightened up. The undead said he had only been observing, and the villain silently decided to guard his thoughts better. The monster kept studying Frey, sensing a kind of mana he'd never felt before and judging him a skilled fighter. Still, he was only a 5-star mage, so the lich decided the human couldn't truly face him, and released his power, ripping through his cloak. The redhead beside him praised Lord Dullard with full confidence. The heroes watched the monster's power rise. The undead said he'd beaten countless men like this before and ordered the mage to surrender and become his. The gray-haired boy stayed calm and said the monster talked too much. The lich immediately cast another spell, creating purple spear-like missiles. The red-haired girl was startled by the spell, but before she could speak, the lich fired at the heroes. The protagonist simply stepped aside, and the attack nearly struck pirates nearby. But the missiles curved in midair and came back for another hit. The mage warned Frey not to relax, the spell would keep chasing him. He dodged again like it was nothing, saying he already understood the trick. Watching nearby, the red-haired boy thought the spell was dangerous. Those missiles would keep tracking their target even if Dullard cast something else. And right after that, the lich used bone hands. Magic spread across the deck and skeletal hands rose from below. The hero kept evading the missiles, but the hands caught him off guard from behind. The villain started celebrating as if the fight was already over, while the girl softly called Frey's name. Then she screamed it as explosions erupted from the lich's magic. The blast grew stronger, forcing the mage to shield herself and the others with a barrier. Everyone nearby scrambled to avoid the leftover attacks. The redhead kept the barrier up until she looked toward the center and realized the protagonist was gone. Only broken parts of the ship remained there. She called out for him, begging for an answer. The blonde mage had already started mourning. Then, without warning, the lich's missiles stopped in midair. The undead was stunned and quickly looked around. His own missiles were now pointed back at him. He hurriedly raised a repulsion shield to block them, but that broke his focus and the mage he was holding with magic slipped free. It didn't matter. He gathered another dark spell in his hands and blasted the remaining missiles apart. He couldn't understand it. How had the boy turned his own magic back on him? He thought the fight was over, until the gray-haired boy appeared behind him. Everyone watching was shocked to see Frey standing there completely unharmed. The lich spun around, unable to understand it, but no matter how he moved, the hero stayed at his back, using speed alone to toy with him. Panicking, the monster jumped into the air to get away. The lich was rattled, trying to figure out how this was even possible. Humans weren't supposed to move like that, but the protagonist only stared up at him, magic shining in his eyes with total confidence. The girl asks if Frey is okay, and he answers with a calm look and a small nod. She stares at him in awe and remembers a vision of another mage who looked a lot like him. The pieces start coming together, and she begins to understand. Then the villain started charging another spell, frightening the blonde boy nearby. The lich unleashed a rain of giant ice spears at the ship. The crew looked up in terror, sure it was over. The lich decided destroying the ship was the only way to save himself, so he kept bombarding it, willing to sacrifice everyone if he had to. Then something stopped him cold. Every attack was blocked with ease. Frey had raised a massive barrier around the ship. The undead could only stare and call it impossible. The blonde boy said it really was. He'd coughed blood trying to stop even one spear. Meanwhile, the girl kept wondering who Frey really was. Above them, the monster called him a mere human, while forming a huge iceberg to hurl at the ship. The blonde boy shouted that nothing could block something that big. Roaring for the humans to die, the lich hurled the massive ice down like a meteor. The protagonist answered by leaping up, charging straight through the giant spear and splitting it in half. He kept rising until he was face to face with the monster. The younger mages on the ship blocked the falling debris. The lich couldn't believe it, ranting that a mere 5-star mage couldn't have stopped him. The gray-haired boy said he simply knew the path he had to walk. The undead shouted back, asking if he truly knew what lay beyond 5 stars. Frey mocked him, saying he'd need to try harder because those spells meant nothing here. Shaken, the lich asked who he really was. The hero first introduced himself as Frey Blake, the Academy's eternal loser, and the name alone terrified the monster. Then he declared he was Lucas Trauman, returned after 4,000 years, the strongest mage in history. The mages on the ship complained they could barely keep up while still trying to stay focused. The girl looked up in worry. In disbelief, the monster said that was impossible. Lucas was dead. Then he lunged forward with one hand in a direct attack. Frey appeared behind him, mocked that he looked better from the back, and struck. His hand pierced past the monster's body and grabbed its blue heart. The protagonist said he knew exactly what it was and asked if the lich still planned to keep living. He added that he'd guessed where the core would be, though the type made it harder to know for sure. While the monster screamed for him to wait, Frey crushed the stone, and a huge blast followed. The monster broke apart and vanished into the air, leaving the mage floating there, watching with a stern face. The mages on the ship were stunned by how fast it ended, and the pirates began mourning their defeat. The red-haired villain kept asking how any of this was possible. Then Frey appeared behind him, making it clear he already knew what came next. There would be no more deals. Every pirate on that ship was going down. Sometime later, all the pirates had been defeated, including the redhead, who ended up in the worst shape of all. The hero stood among the fallen bodies, finishing it all with one final downward strike. After that, he turned and saw the apprentices staring from a distance, especially the red-haired mage, who looked at him in awe. By dawn, they reach a port. Frey gets off the ship with the girl, but a blonde boy stops him and praises his skill. He even says he's a huge fan. Frey just keeps walking, and Isabella is confused by how cold he is. But then the boy steps up, bows, thanks him, and says he'll repay him for saving his life. The girl quickly tells Prith he doesn't need to bow like that. Frey watches in surprise, then quietly relaxes. He asks how the boy feels, since the shockwave could have hurt him. The blonde says he's fine because he had prepared for that kind of thing. Frey finds that funny, and the girl tells him not to be rude. The three walk through the city as Prith asks what happened to Frey. He wants to know how Frey beat the Lich so easily when that should be impossible for a normal mage. He says he's heard of him before, the Academy's most talentless student, and asks if Frey had been hiding his real power the whole time. Frey answers dryly that it's hard to say. Life can surprise you. The two stare at each other in silence until the blonde shrugs and breaks the tension. He agrees that anything can happen while the girl follows behind them. After all that, Prith invites Frey to his home so he can thank him properly. The formal offer leaves Isabella speechless and blushing as she waits for Frey's answer. Frey says he'll think about it if he has time. That makes his companion furious. How could he brush off a noble's invitation? Once Frey gets the idea, he changes his tune and says he might go if there's something to gain. Isabella gets even madder, calling him a bastard while Frey has no clue why. She yells that asking for money is shameless, and he shoots back that they're broke because of her. In the middle of it, the blonde says he doesn't mind but asks why they need money. Frey explains he needs to use the Kasenfini portal stone and it's expensive, making Prith curious. Then the boy gets an idea and digs through his bag, pulling out gold coins as payment for saving him. 3 gold coins, 300 others, which makes the pair instantly happy. Frey says they only need 20 gold, but the noble insists they keep all of it. That makes Frey think, a little worn out, that the kid really is a spoiled rich boy. They keep walking and talking, with the blonde inviting Frey over again. He lists reason after reason, and Frey starts getting tired of it. When Frey finally snaps, Prith says he was only being polite and mentions that his father handles everything himself. But something catches Frey's attention, and he asks if the boy has an older sister. The blonde says yes, she's in the kingdom of Luanable, but Frey only cares about the girl, which annoys the redhead behind him. Prith says his sister comes from a family known for raising strong warriors, and they'd probably be disappointed that he's not great at magic. Isabella tells him not to think like that because he's stronger than he believes. Then Frey grabs the boy's attention and tells him not to lose confidence because such a handsome guy is here to help, making Prith flustered. But Frey ruins it right away by saying to contact him if he has an older sister or even an aunt, which sends Isabella over the edge. She starts shouting at him, calling him a total pervert. The blonde takes a breath for a few seconds and then suddenly laughs. He says it has been a long time since he laughed like that and calls the two of them funny friends. Time passes, and by late afternoon that day, the blonde says it's time for him to leave. He invites them to his home one more time, saying he won't feel right until he repays them. Frey again says he'll go if he has time, and the redhead gets annoyed all over again. They trade looks for a moment, quietly waiting to part ways. Isabella says she takes that as a good sign. They say their goodbyes, and Frey thinks the boy could become a good friend. Frey says the kid was nice the way nobles should be, and his companion agrees, until Frey adds that he also has very deep pockets. That annoys the redhead again. Frey has no idea why she's angry this time either, and when she blows up, he says it's not his fault, he's broke. The next day, Isabella tries on all kinds of outfits and armor, including a flashy mage set, and asks Frey if she looks pretty. Frey answers that he just wants to go home, then tells her to pick practical clothes instead of frilly stuff that will get in the way, leaving her flustered. The redhead starts getting annoyed, then yells that she's just happy to finally wear good clothes, while Frey still doesn't get why she's upset. The shop worker says her companion seems to like simpler clothes, and Frey starts thinking he should never have brought her. Later, near the edge of the city, the group sets out again with new gear. Frey says that no matter how many times he sees it, that item is still amazing. The magic subspace bag, which uses magic to hold way more inside than it should. The girl says it's not that special, and when Frey asks if she's being dramatic, she says it doesn't matter now. Frey takes a breath and thinks over everything. He looks around and notes that like the portal stones, the world has advanced and the population has grown. Then he realizes that's obvious. He's been gone for 4,000 years. He suspects the demigod used to hold human progress back. To the gods, humans are probably just ants. Isabel asks what he's thinking about, and says they've already reached the portal stone. Frey scratches his cheek, still thinking, and says he'll figure that out on his own. A man announces that the portal is opening, and tells everyone to step into the magic circle. Frey is surprised they can run separate groups like this. He's impressed by how the portal works, while the girl tells him to stop embarrassing her there. A magic circle forms overhead and spreads wider. Frey warns her that first-timers often get sick, and she snaps that she already knows. The portal activates, giving everyone a strange feeling, and they're carried through a tunnel-like space until the trip ends. Frey looks up in surprise as they arrive at Hispania. He studies the land and thinks that even after 4,000 years, some things never change. He turns to ask where they should go next, but finds Isabel vomiting from portal sickness. She insists it's only because she skipped breakfast and says food will fix it, while Frey thinks he really shouldn't have brought her. Not far away, several men are drinking in a tavern, and the bartender notices something. His attention shifts as Frey bursts in demanding food and a drink, shocking the redhead when he orders alcohol. She yells that drinking that is totally irresponsible. Frey tells her to be quiet. She has no idea how long it's been since he had a drink. He also says he still doesn't get why the academy doesn't sell alcohol, leaving Isabel speechless. Then she starts yelling again that the reason is obvious. While Frey argues, everyone starts drinking at 13 anyway. The bartender brings their order and asks if they're mercenaries. Frey ignores him and lights up when the food arrives. The bartender says that if they're here, they must be rookies, especially dressed in brand new gear like they're going after a dragon. Frey keeps eating and says nothing. The bald man says that's not all bad. Rich kids should enjoy being young, but warns them to eat and head back because rookies shouldn't challenge the mountains. Isabel says she heard the place is packed with dangerous monsters. That only makes the bartender mad, and he says she has no idea what she's talking about. She gets startled while the other adventurers laugh nearby at the thought of them taking on the mountains. Frey ignores all of it and keeps stuffing himself. Then the bartender apologizes, saying he has a son around their age. He explains the boy once trained to be a mercenary, which is why he spoke up. Isabel asks where his son is now. The old man says he's gone. He tried to enter the mountain. She apologizes, but he says it's fine. He brought it up himself. The old man goes on, saying his son was escorting a mother and daughter, and only the daughter came back alone, saying his son wasn't returning. The bartender says he's not trying to insult them, but entering the mountain is a bad idea. They might never come back. Isabel has no words after hearing that story. Then Frey breaks the silence, still eating like nothing happened, and says the food is great. After that, they ask the old man what kind of monsters live in the mountain. The redhead takes a bite too, wanting to see if Frey is right, and finds out the food is actually awful.